Welcome to America's Defense Communities, the podcast. I'm Randy Ford. Today we're bringing you discussions I had with two defense community leaders. They work primarily with different military services in different states and often on different issues. But there's a common thread in their work, and we see it in the work of many of their colleagues across the country. They come from military backgrounds. It gives them a unique perspective on the needs on each side of the fence. Later in the podcast, we'll hear from Dayton Development Coalition's Elaine Bryant. But first, here's my discussion with Jim Iacocca. He's the president and CEO of the Knox Regional Development Alliance in Kentucky. He recently announced he's stepping down at the end of 2024. We talked about his work at KRDA and his Army career. He served at the Pentagon and at several installations, including Fort Knox, where he retired from the Army in 2019. I started by asking him about the transition from military service to becoming a defense community leader.
You know, it's funny. I just spoke on this recently to a community where I shared this, and I'll tell you, hey, how much time do you have to talk about this? You know, but I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. So, you know, KRDA. So the community created KRDA. They started in 2016. It had been an organization for many years called the Core Committee, but they wanted to create a full-time organization called KRDA in 2016. 2015, 2016, they hatched the idea. They called me a year out from my retirement and said, hey, we'd like you to do this job. And I'm like, well, I've got a whole year to retire. I can't do it. You know, you're going to fill this as soon as you advertise it. And, 9 months later, the job still wasn't filled. They had interviewed some folks. They even offered the job to somebody, and the person didn't take it. And so I kind of like to think it was divine intervention. And I say that because Fort Knox is such a wonderful installation, and the community outside Fort Knox is such a wonderful installation. I'm like, it's such a wonderful community. I'm like, they're going to fill it in a heartbeat. And they didn't. And so, as I was transitioning out, I knew what I didn't want to do, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But there were certain things I took off the list. But one thing I knew I wanted to do was serve. I did that for 29 years in uniform. So I still wanted to do something to make things around me better and to continue to serve. And so that's why I think this job is just so great, because I work in a great community for a great installation, Fort Knox, and I continue to serve a community and serve Fort Knox and try to make things better for everybody involved. So that was my journey to that. As I transitioned out, I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be a government contractor. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just wasn't for me.
Right.
And I knew I wanted to serve. And this just opportunity, I just amazed that it was still open 9 months later. They came to me and said, are you interested now? I'm like, sure, let's talk. And, it worked out beautifully.
What was your back experience in terms of working with communities when you were still in uniform?
So again, as I mentioned, the Core Committee was here for decades before it turned itself into KRDA. So I had 2 tours on Fort Knox. The first time I was here, 2008 to 2010 as a brigade commander. And then I came back from 2013 to 2017 as the DCG of recruiting and then the Adjutant General of the Army. And in both those times, the community was extremely, extremely welcoming and proud of Fort Knox and having Fort Knox there. Attendance by elected officials, community leaders, business leaders at all kinds of events on Fort Knox. And Fort Knox's participation in a whole bunch of different events off the installation. So, my impression of the community was one that really valued Fort Knox, valued the service of the military members at Fort Knox. And, in turn, the members at Fort Knox really appreciated the community. Every community around Fort Knox would have a community partnership dinner. I mean, you were going to social events all the time off the installation. So it was really nice. And I'm not taking away from anybody else. I've been around a bunch of different installations in the Army, 29 years in the Army, bunch of different installations, but bunch of different posts. I never felt welcomed as anywhere as I did at Fort Knox. And so that really, resonated with my wife and I. And why retiring here was an easy decision. And when this job opportunity came up, it was an easy decision.
Has that then been part of your mission, is to make sure that other service members and their families feel as welcome in the community as you did?
So it is really one of our 4 goals, is to do everything that we can to make sure that the community does everything it can for the soldiers and spouses at Fort Knox. So we do spend a lot of time with programs to welcome soldiers to Fort Knox, to help spouses find employment, and on the flip side, helping soldiers transition out into meaningful work in the community.
I'm curious what you think, because I think nationally, our country is very supportive of our military, and certainly we see that in defense communities. But I think it requires more than what some people realize. You have kind of the surface level. You see the flags, thank you for your service, and those are important things. But it really takes more to kind of cultivate those deeper relationships and make the most of them for folks on both sides of the fence. What do you think takes, what it requires to have those deeper relationships?
So what I really think it takes is the community really understanding what the installation needs and meeting those needs. Many times the community says, "Hey, we want to do this." I'm like, "That's not what Fort Knox needs." "Well, we want to do this." I'm like, "Fort Knox isn't going to support it." So it's understanding those things to make sure that you don't get sideways, ahead of, or behind the installation that you are supporting. I think it's going that extra mile, that when there's a need on the installation, that the community supports it. And like you said, everybody's supportive for all those things. And, it comes around the holidays and at Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's toy drives and there's food drives and all those things. It's helping to give generously to those events to support. I think it's also very much inviting the military to be part of your community, and having a seat for them on various boards in the community, non-voting members obviously, but to be able to be there, to be part of that community. It's inviting them out to speak at various events. It's one of those things. I don't know. I don't think it's really rocket science. It's just those partnerships of making those deeper connections. And, you guys at ADC talk about it all the time. And it's true. Blur the line. Where does the post start and where does the community end, or vice versa, and blur that line. Now, granted, there's a hard fence that runs across the road, right. And there's gate access. You got to
use your ID to get into one part of it.
There's that gate access, but when it's one of those things, when the community, when the post asks for support and the community provides it, or when the community needs something and the post says, "How can we help?" Those are things that really build those relationships. And it's different every place you go. Some places are so independent and so large, it's much harder. On some of the installations where it's smaller and the installation's more remote and the community is really the only thing that's out there, it really becomes a little bit tighter.
I don't
know if I really answered that question well. What it takes, what it really takes. If I were going to sum it up in a word, it takes a close relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we talk about that as the one community concept that you referenced there, and then also by helping promote some best practices among great American defense communities. And around the time that you transitioned from Fort Knox to KRDA in 2018, Fort Knox region was named a Great American Defense Community. What has that designation or that kind of title meant to the area, and what do you think it means to act as a Great American Defense Community?
Yeah. So first, I've got to tell you that it's better to be lucky than good, and all that work was done in 2017 before I even joined the organization in 18. And I just walked into that, right? So I'm like, hey, great. On my first ADC event, we're being recognized as a great American defense community. So
and I knew that, but I wasn't going to put that on you. But
it's all fair. Let's be transparent. I just, I've been very blessed in many ways. But, I think what it meant for the community was recognition for what the community does for Fort Knox. The events of, the support that it gave to transitioning service members, the recognition it gives to soldiers when they come there, the welcoming attitude, the patriotism, the love of those service members and their families. I think to the community, it was validation. And so that's what I think it meant to the community at that moment. I think it sent the message to the post that there's a lot of great places around the country, but your community was just recognized among the best. What it meant going forward was, let's just keep doing what we're doing, and how can we make it better? And I think that's what so validation of and recognition of what you were doing, letting the post know that we've been recognized by a national organization for the community support, but let's not rest on our laurels. What can this, let's keep doing what we're doing because it mattered. What can we do to take it up a notch? And I think that's where the community was just like, hey, this was really great and very proud. I mean, you could just see how proud they were when Bob Ross came down to present at I don't know if you know this, it corresponded with the 100th anniversary of Fort Knox being Fort Knox.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there that day as well when the soldiers and community members recreated that 100-year-old photo spelling out Fort Knox on the field.
That was wonderful. Just a side note, I was still in my 1-year cooling off period as a general officer.
Oh, right.
I couldn't represent directly to Fort Knox. They let me go out there and speak a little bit. But they let me stand in the formation, but I couldn't be involved in the planning of the event. It's crazy. And so once my 1-year cooling off period is over, things got a lot nicer. But
yeah, you were ready to be hands-on.
That first year was a little challenging, and that event that happened during the first year was really kind of funny.
You mentioned looking forward. So I think a lot of our listeners know that you have made the decision that you're going to retire from KRDA at the end of 2024. We're talking now in the fall of 2023. So there's still some time for that transition. What guidance would you give to kind of the next generation of defense community leaders, whether that's who eventually takes your place at KRDA or people who are working in other communities or like you said you did, want to serve in that capacity?
So, I think what makes a great defense community leader is the same thing that makes a great leader anywhere, and that's humility and having a servant's heart and helping others first. I think that's really, that's aspirational. We all try to do it. We fall short, we get up, we keep trying. So it's not like, you're going to live it every day. I mean, if you can, great. But, to have a servant's heart and just be humble and just think of everything first, before you think about self. Listen, that's one of those things. Listen first, speak second. And sometimes don't speak at all. Just listen and, let somebody else in the room answer. I learned that from a very senior general officer, like, hey, be the last person to speak in the room, because as soon as you speak, everybody else stops. And so, I think great leaders, by position of being the leader in the room, people may defer to you. So don't speak until you have to, and let other people share the ideas. Enlist support of others, build the team, understand that, KRDA is just one, the Knox Regional Development Alliance is just one part of the puzzle. We have engaged chambers of commerce in the different communities, right? We have industrial foundations and other economic organizations in the communities, and we all need to work together. So be a good team player, be a good partner, enlist the support of others and work with others and plug in where you can. And tell your community and your installation story as often as you can in as many places as you can.
A lot of that sounds like the kind of a modified cooling off period in general, where it's about letting other people take on some roles too, and not just being the commander in the room.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to mention about your work or what you think can be happening in defense communities?
So, I think the challenges ahead are interesting for all defense communities. I think that we're all alike, but we're all alike and we're all different, right? It doesn't matter, where you are we have different missions and different commands and even different services, yet we all work towards the same thing. And that is to make our base, our post camp stations, installation bases, whatever you want to call them, the best that they can be in the communities, as most supportive as they can be, develop relationships with new leaders as they come in. So that's how we're all different and all the same. I think what's really the challenges ahead, and I'd like to say it's short term, but history says it's not, budget uncertainty. That budget uncertainty really hurts our installations. And the recruiting challenge right now, I know it's affected Knox. It has slowed or even stopped mission growth in the Army. And, there was a unit that was probably going to come to Fort Knox in the next couple of years that now is on permanent hold because of the recruiting challenges.
Right.
And, I don't think that just affects Fort Knox. I think that affects everybody. And I think those budget uncertainties affect everybody as well.
Yeah.
And as I look to KRDA's own future, before I leave, some of my focus is on, finding the right person to take this job. I'm leaving because, quite candidly, our daughter lives in Portland, Oregon. We live in Louisville, Kentucky. It's too far away. And so I love what I do. And I tell folks, if our daughter was within a 3 hours drive, I would never leave here. But she's not. And my wife and I want to be closer. And that's why I'm leaving. So I have a very vested interest in who comes in behind me to take on the organization and to work with the community installation.
So you still have a busy year ahead, is what I'm hearing.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everything you do there at Fort Knox, and then also for being such a strong voice within ADC and continuing to do that again for the next year plus.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Just to tell you, I've really enjoyed my association with ADC. Before I took this job, I didn't know that, there was an association of defense communities.
Right.
And, I think my first conference was in March of 2018 out in San Diego. And I'm like, hey, it was such an eye-opening and educational experience for me that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed going to all of them. Missed them during COVID. I think you guys did the best you could with the virtual meetings, and that was good on our budgets. But I don't know if it was necessarily best for the exchange of ideas. But I really do think that what you do for all of the defense communities is really awesome, and just bringing the communities together for the exchange of ideas has just been tremendous.
Again, that was Jim Iacocca, President and CEO of the Knox Regional Development Alliance in Kentucky. Now we're going to go just a little bit north to Ohio. I also talked recently with Elaine Bryant. She's Executive Vice President for Aerospace and Defense at the Dayton Development Coalition. She's also Managing Director of the Military and Federal Sector for JobsOhio. She came to this job after 20 years in the Air Force, wrapping up her service with a posting at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I asked her about that journey from being an airman to being a community development leader.
Thanks, Randy, for having me on and giving me the opportunity to share my story. It's really exciting to kind of look back at my 20-year Air Force career. And, when you give your base pass away and they say, okay, thank you for your service. And you go out into the community and you're like, okay, what am I going to do now? Which, by the way, what I was going to do was bake cookies and be a stay-at-home mom and soccer mom. in 5
Which
months.
which is great too. That's a
Yes,
noble profession
totally
as
great.
well.
Trust me, that was the dream, right? So, after your, 20 years of experience and you're out the gate and you're like, what am I going to do? Like, is this really what I'm going to do? Is be home. And you realize that there's so much opportunity to continue to serve and use the experiences that you have from the military out in your community. Especially if you're still living in that defense community where, in my case, I retired after 20 years from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I did a little bit of everything. Still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Of course, I'm an engineer by education. I did program management. I ran an intelligence engineering squadron at NASIC and F-35 and checked the Pentagon box here or there. Of course, my dream job was to be a commander, which I did twice, and teach at the Air Force Academy, which I did once. So I had all these experiences, and now I'm on the outside and I'm looking in going, all right, so what am I going to do? And so I get this call from a trusted friend from the base who says, hey, you got to meet with this guy who works at a Dayton Development Coalition because you are the perfect person for this job. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm baking cookies. That's not what I'm doing. So after a couple lunches with my current boss, Jeff Hoagland, I was sold in being able to take all those experiences from my 20 years. And, I'm an Air Force Academy grad, so I have my experiences from being back there. And that's where I taught. And I was able to take it and bring it to this organization to help preserve and protect the missions at Wright-Pat, right? So if you know what's going on at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they are the acquisition headquarters for the Air Force. They are research and development with the Air Force Research Lab, intelligence, again, part of my background, AFIT, which is, the MIT of the Air Force. And so I was able to look at that career and say, I can use my connections, use my experiences to help protect those missions here and also grow them, right? And also help this community understand what those missions are. So when people are out and about in Dayton or Springfield, they know what's happening inside the fence, and they know how strongly connected they are to being at the tip of national security, right? Like it's all happening here. And, people usually think of being at the tip of the spear. You have to be like in the F-16 dropping bombs and all that stuff. But I will tell you, the folks here at Wright-Pat and in Dayton, they're at the cutting edge because this is where all the technologies are being driven out of. And this is where all the acquirers are, and the companies that are here in this community that support that mission, and even the industries that are not specifically related to aerospace and defense. They're all connected to the mission because they support, the families, whether it's medical services, whether it's IT, finance, all of those things. So it's been very exciting to, over the last 4 years, going from retiring in May of 2019 to October of 2019, I took this job. So almost 4 years, actually almost to the date. And just to be able to know that I'm still being able to serve and use all that the Air Force has given me over the last 20 years to continue to serve them.
What was it like being in Dayton as a community when you were still on the base? Did it feel, we hear from some people who maybe, felt more at home in some communities than maybe they did others. You were open, it sounds like maybe reluctant at first, but open to taking a job in Dayton. What was your perspective of the community when you were still on base?
So I think that you get, when you're in your military career, you're in different phases, right? So for me, I was an officer. So you're kind of a junior officer, and you're just, wherever you land, you want to make sure that there's a good vibe and places to go and hang out. And then you've got your mid-career in there where you're now starting to have kids and families and all of that. And then you're more senior where you're now in leadership roles, and you might get more exposed to a different aspect of the community than in those other two phases. And so I was at Wright-Pat in both my mid-career and later career. And so when I got here, we had, we were having babies. So I had two boys. They were both born at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And, I will tell you, our head was pretty down. We went home, we went to the daycare, we went to work, then we reversed it, picked them up, and we went back home. And it was just all that we could do to survive, especially in my case, we're dual military. So my husband was in as well. And at that time, I was also an aide de camp. So I was traveling everywhere. So, in that mid-career and family going, we didn't really get out much. Now, the second time we came back to Wright Pat and in this community, I was starting to get more exposed to the community and the leadership and some of the things that they were doing. Like in Dayton, we have an amazing Hometown Heroes program, right? So we're able to now, okay, we can breathe and we can take the kids to a ball game and we can enjoy the community and, all the things that they do to support us. So it was fun to be able to see it a little bit differently. I will say where I would probably encourage others to maybe think differently about it while you're in uni is connections with industry. I think sometimes when you're in uniform inside the fence, you're kind of in the mentality of, well, we have to go through a contracting process, or we have to, I can't talk to industry unless I talk to all of them. And looking back at my time in Life Cycle Management Center, I would encourage more folks to work with their industry partners, because right now that I'm on this side of the fence and I work on a daily basis with all the companies that truly, truly believe in the mission of the Air Force and want to work with them, I wish that more officers on the inside were more open to taking those calls, to come out and speak at different things. And so those are my perspectives in terms of, depending on where you are in uniform and in your career and life, you will see your community a little bit differently.
That's an interesting perspective, the industry connection. And why is that beneficial to an officer necessarily?
Yeah. So I think, looking back, I think what I missed out on was the innovation, the thinking outside the box, the being exposed to the good work that's being done outside of a contracting process, right? So a contracting process is very set, it's far, and we absolutely have to do that. And I'm not advocating otherwise, but if we're out in the community, if we're interacting with folks on the industry sector and the side that are coming up with innovative ideas that maybe we just haven't thought of, right? So we're on the inside as acquisition officers and we're trying to put out RFPs, but we're just, inside our box, inside the fence. We may not be understanding that there might be 10 companies working on 10 different ideas to solve my problem that I just don't know about, or they may not know about me, right? So there could be companies that working on commercial solutions that may not have any idea what's happening on the defense side, or that commercial solution could solve a warfighter problem, right? Because they're not searching the RFPs that I put out, in my open source and all those things. So again, just having that connection. And again, we live in the same community as these folks, right? I mean,
right.
They're in our kids' daycares, they're in our churches, they're in, the Hometown Heroes events that we're at. And so that's something that I am very happy that I think we, as the Dayton Development Coalition, as the liaison between the industry community and the base, we do those Hometown Heroes events, we do community receptions to bring those people together on a continual basis. Because as you know, folks rotate in and out so often. So that's why it's important to keep those relationships and keep those events and activities going.
You mentioned industry. Let's talk about that for a minute, because the defense industry, aerospace industry are huge around Dayton, but really statewide in Ohio, as well as DoD civilians. And you have a dual role, which is a little unique among defense community leaders, because you also have a role at JobsOhio. So talk about the connection between Dayton Development Coalition and your role at JobsOhio and kind of how those go together.
So it's really exciting to be able to take my military experiences and my role in the Dayton Development Coalition, which is to preserve and protect the missions at Wright Pat, Springfield, and our Dayton VA, and be able to go to other communities to help teach them how to do that. So Dayton Development Coalition has been doing this for 20 years, right? We have a long-standing relationship with our folks at Wright Pat, Springfield, and the VA. And so our president at JobsOhio, JP Nassif, is a former veteran. And he saw the opportunity to take the model from the Dayton Development Coalition and spread it statewide. And so he instantiated a 10th sector for JobsOhio. So these sectors are we have 9 industry sectors. So automotive, aerospace, finance, tech, agriculture, so on and so forth. So they added a 10th called military and federal, dedicated to preserving and protecting the federal missions across the entire state of Ohio. And the reason we add the word federal is because we recognize the huge impact that NASA Glenn has in Cleveland and Sandusky. So for those of you listening to this podcast, if you didn't know that NASA was in Ohio, not only do you know now, but just know that it is an amazing, amazing organization that leads in power, propulsion, and communications for NASA, both in aeronautics and in space. And so my job as the military and federal sector lead is to go to the Daytons of the different cities across the state. So Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, Youngstown, and help them build the relationships and the different tools and opportunities that we have built over a long time in Dayton so that they can be stronger defense communities, right? So for my Association of Defense Community folks, I mean, this is like the model that you probably want to take to the next step nationally with all the great work you guys are doing, right? So we talk regionally and statewide, and then we bump up to what you're doing, right? You're trying to do it nationally. So we're building that for our whole state. Now, I will give great kudos, well-deserved. There are some communities that already have this in place. So Youngstown had a strong and still has a very strong defense community, and Columbus, Ohio. So Columbus has Rickenbacker. They have Defense Supply Center Columbus and a Defense Logistics Center there. And then Youngstown has the Youngstown Air Reserve Station. So right there's an example of Dayton is active, Columbus has got our guard, and then Youngstown has got the reserve component. So they already had some strong things, but by bringing me and my team in, so my teammates are Michael Dustman and Ryan Blackburn, by bringing us on board, we're able to help amplify their message at different levels, whether it's at the state legislative level, whether it's helping them with DSIP. So Youngstown just won DSIP grant, announced just a month ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we took the lessons learned from what we did in Dayton to win a DSIP, and we shared it with Youngstown. And so we're helping them. So even though they had their pocket, their group set up, we were able to bring more to their fight. And then there's other communities as well. So Toledo, their chamber is very strong in their community as well. But again, bringing additional help in the advocacy realm from our perspective. So I always tell people what's good for Dayton is good for Ohio. What's good for Ohio is good for Dayton. So these jobs are just really complementary. And it's an honor to not only be able to do the regional stuff, but also to do statewide.
You've mentioned several sites that I think if you ask people outside Ohio to map defense communities in Ohio, that they would not necessarily have thought of. What do you find when you go to those communities in terms of their relationship to the industry and to the military versus maybe a larger defense community that does have a larger presence, maybe a major installation like Wright-Patterson?
Well, for all of those communities, I will say we can always do better. We can always improve. So even here, in Dayton and Wright-Pat, we are always continually looking for opportunities to improve those connections. But I will say it's been really fun to get to know these other communities. One that I did not mention was Lima. Lima has General Dynamics Land Systems, is in Lima, and they produce all the tanks that the Army uses. How many people know that? I mean, billions of dollars just north of Dayton, 2 hours of Dayton, Ohio. And the tanks come off the assembly line here for the entirety of our Army. I mean, it's just amazing what we have. And so as you get to know the communities, you get to know where the gaps in knowledge are. And I know, ADC is defense communities, but I'll use NASA again as an example because, when I tell the guys, this is part of, we're getting better, right? When you fly into Cleveland, you fly in and you see the giant NASA meatball on the side of their hangar. And that's the kind of publicity I want for all our defense communities, right? So that when you, you come in, and we have it at Dayton Airport, home of Wright-Pat and all those things. But, there's always a lot more work to do. And Randy, you and I were talking about the JobsOhio ads that we had outside of Ohio. And it's funny because a lot of people don't realize how much work we do to advertise Ohio and to get people to understand quality of life and how we're a defense community. But we had these ad campaigns where we had billboards, and it said, if you're in, it was in DC, and it said, and you're sitting on, 375, and it says, if you lived in Ohio, you'd be home by now. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Just, different things like that to get the word out as to why Ohio. And then how do you connect it to the defense? Well, we did that ad campaign about, sitting in traffic and all those other ones. We did that just in general to attract industry to Ohio. But then we took it very focused to our defense communities. And one of the things we just did was we partnered with AFA for the past couple of years to have quite the presence at the Air Force Association. And it's been wonderful. The response we've gotten, and basically our tagline is, we're taking care of America's military, right? That's what we want to do. We want, when people get their orders and it says Ohio on it, for them to be like, yes, right? It may never be Hawaii response. I get it. But we want them to know that their family is going to be taken care of, that what they're doing, their mission is going to be impactful, that their kids are going to have good schools. And those are the things that we work on with our legislative entities, our advocacy folks. And that's just really important for us to get that message out, whether it be in any of those towns.
You mentioned earlier, and I'll close with this, that there are things that can be done better in Dayton, and you think in all defense communities. What do you want to see develop even further over the next few years?
So I want us to keep on the track that we are. I mean, we are working very closely with all of the, we call them the Big 10. There's 10 pretty large missions at Wright Pat. One of them includes, by the way, Navy. So we have the Naval Medical Readiness Unit. Dayton is there, who's just an amazing facility, probably, the global leader in human physiology, R&D and testing. But what I would like to see get better is just, and maybe it's not just better, but continue to grow, right, is that relationship, and also the connection with industry and the connection with the community. Like I said, you still always find someone who's like, I don't know what they do at the base, or I don't know this, or right. But we're continuing to have our Hometown Heroes events. I host a digital roundtable about once a quarter, maybe more often, where we talk about the digital transformation that the Department of the Air Force is undergoing. And we bring in universities, industry partners. And I get a steady like 150 most of the time for a free webinar. And we bring on folks from the base to share, hey, this is what's coming up, those kinds of things. The other thing that is growing, and I'd love to see it to continue to go, is as a community, we host the Life Cycle Industry Days and the Right Dialogue with Industry, and that's a partnership with the Life Cycle Management Center and the Air Force Research Labs. So we had over 1,800 people in Dayton this summer, and we're looking at over 2,000 next year at our convention center. And it's basically an industry opportunity to hear what is happening at Wright Pat in those two organizations, and how can industry and academia and anyone else who wants to know about it, how they can get plugged in to get contracts, to serve, to provide R&D. So, while, when we think of being a defense community, there's so many things, right? There's the taking care of the family, there's the taking care of the member, there's the taking care of the mission. So that's where this industry piece comes in. And what I love about Dayton and the state of Ohio is we look at all of that holistically, right? We're not just focused on one. We have lots of partners that help us execute many of those things, but we look at it very strategically because, our goal is to stay as the number one state for military missions, military and federal missions, the members both in and out of uniform. So something we haven't talked about, but I'll just hint at, is the importance of our civilian workforce and their families, and what they contribute is part of what makes a defense community strong, right? Sure. And so that's a huge part of us. So we're very proud to support all of that and just continue our efforts to make Ohio the place where our missions and our members and their families and veterans. We are the number 5 state for veterans as well. We take care of them as well. So it's just a fun, humbling opportunity to be able to continue to serve.
Well, thank you for your service. Thank you for everything you do for Ohio and within the ADC community, and for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks again to Elaine Bryant from the Dayton Development Coalition and JobsOhio, and to Jim Iacocca from the Knox Regional Development Alliance for talking with us. We have more one-on-one conversations with defense community leaders from across the country in the November 2023 edition of America's Defense Communities magazine. That includes a look at how the landscape has changed for women in the military and communities, and some of the emerging voices that make up the next generation of community leaders. You can find those conversations and much more in the upcoming edition of America's Defense Communities magazine. This episode of America's Defense Communities, the podcast, was produced by Mark Parrott and Allison Yang. It was written and hosted by Randy Ford, audio mixing by Mark Parrott. America's Defense Communities, the podcast, is a production of the Association of Defense Communities. Join us at defensecommunities.org.